Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to the Andrew Eborn Show, where we tackle the stories reshaping our world with sharp insight and fearless discussions. I'm Andrew Eborn, or what's left of him after the last 100 days. And today we're going to be diving into the seismic impact of President Donald Trump's first 100 days in his second term. From bold tariffs sparking a White House clash with Amazon to deportation policies, global diplomacy at Pope Francis' funeral, and his alliance with Elon Musk's. Trump's agenda is shaking markets, geopolitics, and headlines worldwide. Joining us again is the brilliant Greg Swenson, founding partner of Brigg, Macadam, and chairman of Republican Overseas UK, a leading voice on markets, economics, and politics. Greg, welcome back.
Great to see you, Andrew. Great to be here.
And you've gone over to the States again. Now, where are you at the moment?
I'm in Chicago.
The Windy
Very
City.
blue state, very, very Democrat state and city. But in spite of that, it's a good time.
Well, talk about Windy City. It's been a whirlwind 100
Yeah.
days, 139 executive orders, if I've counted correctly, market volatility and global provocations. Talk me through the latest in terms of impact. We've talked about tariffs roiling markets and his diplomatic moves are grabbing headlines. Let's start on the economic front because there's been a major clash today with Amazon and also the new car tariffs are making waves. What's your take on Trump's economic agenda so far?
Yeah, look, I think in the long run, it's really great. There's going to be some difficulties, perhaps, for example, with supply chains, maybe some slight one-time price adjustments. But in the long run, this is all necessary and all constructive. So I'm really pleased with it. I didn't expect this kind of scale and speed, but it's been really refreshing to see the administration come out of the gates with that kind of speed and scale and come out swinging, which is what we voted for. So I'm thrilled. In spite of the volatility in the markets, I think that's easily remedied, and I think we'll start to see trade deals soon. Maybe as soon as today, we'll see a trade deal with India being announced.
Okay, well, we'll certainly keep our eyes and ears open for that. I mean, let's go back to the Amazon situation though, because White House called Amazon hostile and political for reportedly planning to display Trump's tariffs costs on products. Well, Trump prepares to sign an executive order on car tariffs. As you say, there might be a deal with India and so on and so forth. As a financier at Brigg, Macadam, how do you see this public spat with Amazon affecting investor confidence? And do Trump's tariffs, 125% on China, now targeting autos, signal a sustainable boost for US manufacturing or a deeper trade war risk? What's your view?
Yeah. So on Amazon, no surprise there. There's hostility from Amazon. Look, remember, Bezos owns the Washington Post. Even though they claim to be tilting toward the center, they are a radically progressive newspaper. And so, and Amazon as well. I mean, I think tech has changed over the last year or two. I think it's become, you're now permitted to be a conservative, which wasn't the case 2 years ago. But still, you have this legacy hostility from companies like Amazon. And I think you'll continue to see that. That was a hit job completely. And I think Caroline Levitt did a great job of addressing that this morning when it was announced. Didn't really shock the markets either. So I'm not really worried about that. In terms of the long run, I think you asked about tariffs on autos. Already the president this morning here in the U.S., backed away a bit on the auto tariffs. He's going to, not double tariff the auto parts people or the automakers. I think there's a real deal coming there. I think that, yes, he wants to protect U.S. auto business. He wants to make it fair. Why does the EU have 5 times or 4 times the tariff on American cars that we have on European cars? So, as long as it's free and fair, I think we're going to get to a deal with all of the big automakers around the world. He had a meeting yesterday in the White House with both the U.S. and U.S. domestic as well as foreign auto companies, and so there's some real progress there.
Okay, well, that sounds encouraging. And again, we'll follow that progress. Well, in the meantime, a European central bank policy maker suggested that the euro could overtake the dollar as a global safe haven due to Trump's chaotic trade war, as he calls it, with tariffs driving market swings. How credible do you think this shift is? And what does it mean for US economic dominance as Trump hits this iconic 100-day mark?
Look, there was definitely markets don't like uncertainty, and we've had a lot of uncertainty because we don't know what the tariffs are going to look like. You know, he's pivoted quite a bit. You have 100 countries coming to Washington to negotiate trade deals. I think you'll see the top 17 or 18 come out with deals in the near term. So all of this is going to settle down. It's complete absurd rhetoric for the ECB or anybody else to talk about, the Trump is, Trump's trade war and it's going to, be destructive to the economy. No, not at all. This is not a trade war that Trump started. The war's been going on for 30 years. It's not free and fair trade. He wants to make it free and fair, and it will be when we start to see these deals. Also, keep in mind, Andrew, that the EU is 28 different separate bond markets, right? So making it the reserve currency is impossible until they decide to make the EU one big bond market, which I don't see happening in the near term.
Yeah, I always say that looking at the global provocation and trade stability, we talk about Trump's probably doing the biggest land grab in history, is how I put it, including looking at Mars. He's threatened to take the Panama Canal and next Canada and take Greenland. Obviously, that's unsettled allies. Well, his tariff flip-flops, including the 90-day pause, royal markets. From your global finance lens, Greg, how are these 100-day actions reshaping America's economic alliances and market stability?
Well, I think the market stability, again, will come as soon as there's some clarity around tariffs and trade, and that's coming. So, in spite of the volatility we've had for the last 30 days or so. But I think in terms of the global economics, it's really in many ways a reset. This is something that's been going on for not just 30 years with China, but for 80 years with the Europeans and our other trading partners. And so it was kind of a long crawl toward unfair and unequal trade. And it's something, it didn't happen overnight, but it needs a reset. The trade deficits that the US carries are unsustainable. And what's happened is, we run a 300 billion plus trade deficit with China. So does the EU, or roughly. It's maybe not as large as ours, but the EU is carrying this massive trade deficit with China and some other partners. So they have to make up for that by running a massive trade surplus with the United States. That's so we're basically the deficit country. The EU is relatively neutral. They have some surplus, some deficit, balances out. The UK doesn't really matter. It doesn't have much of a trade surplus or deficit with the US, but China is the beneficiary here. They are a major export economy. They have very little consumption. That unbalance can't continue. This is not just going to make America better and our trading partners like the Europeans better. It's actually in the long run, ironically, going to make China better because that export-based, exporting cheap and slave labor to other parts of the world by sending cheap products is not sustainable, and it's not good for the 350 million people in China living on a bowl of rice every week. So, this is something that is going to be better for the world in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, you make a very interesting point there, Greg. I mean, obviously, China itself, they're benefiting because their biggest trade is obviously with Southeast Asia. And as all these tariffs have a knock-on effect throughout that region, they've increased their trade, haven't they? And they've got a net benefit.
Yeah, I think, look, they are a powerful economy. I can't argue with that, number two in the world, but their people are still starving in many parts of China. And so, and they're exporting cheap and slave labor and excess capacity that they have. They're in deep trouble. They have a major deflation problem, which is why I think it's so funny when people freak out about tariffs and they say, "Oh, Trump is mean. He's putting tariffs." Well, the EU uses tariffs, the UK uses tariffs, India massively, China, and there's no inflation from those tariffs. Inflation, as you know, Andrew, came from reckless government spending and hostility to the supply side. It's like economics 101. So for the economically illiterate out there who are running around saying, the world's on fire because of tariffs, it's not the case. The world's on fire because of reckless spending and welfare, European welfare states. So we'll fix all this. I'm quite confident.
Okay, well, confidence is always good. People like confidence. I want to look at the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and boy, do we need one of those over here in the UK. But they've been slashing federal budgets, claiming hundreds of billions is what they've claimed in savings, but obviously faces criticism for its data control and tariff tensions. As a market expert, Greg, how feasible are these cuts, and what economic risks does DOGE's influence pose?
Yeah, as far as economic risks, none. It's economically beneficial, no doubt. You're taking power and money away from the public sector, and that gets reallocated to the private sector. It's complete distortion to a capitalist country, to a democratic country, to take so much money out of the private sector. And and as you know, the capital markets and the private sector are much better allocators of capital than government bureaucrats. And that's the case in both countries, both the US and the UK. So no, DOGE is good news. I was on with one particularly economically illiterate Democrat today on the radio, and she was complaining about DOGE and how mean it is, and it's going to cut all these government programs, and then also complain that Elon promised $1 trillion in savings, and he's only got 150. Pick your poison, but these people are completely uninformed on how real economies work. So DOGE is a great thing. I hope he keeps at it.
Yeah, well, I certainly it's going to keep hitting those headlines. I love the fact you're speaking to. You always like more platforms than Paddington. It's like me, isn't it? It's always a joy. I want to talk about foreign policy then. I mean, from tariffs to global diplomacy, Trump's 100 days of reshaping the world stage. Let's have a look at his foreign policy. I mean, we had that extraordinary image, which I say was staged. It doesn't matter as long as it achieves what it does, but and achieves peace, which is the key thing. High stake moments like the Pope Francis's funeral and the Gaza crisis are defining his America First approach. First of all, what was your take on that extraordinary picture? As I say, it seemed to me that it was engineered. The rest in peace was an obvious headline, which at least one paper took. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, if it was engineered, good for whoever engineered it. It was really well done, and those are the moments that, Trump. This is great for President Trump. He is quite the actor in many ways, and he likes communicating. He's, in spite of his tendency to be provocative and sometimes send mean tweets, he is really good at communicating. It is clearly the most transparent administration we've had in our history. So if they orchestrated that, some smart comms person, good for them. It was also interesting that it was supposed to be 3 chairs with Macron, and President Trump said, "No, that's not happening."
It was a great sight, wasn't he? Sort of pushed Macron aside. 3 chairs, hip hip hooray, but not for you.
Yeah, go paint a landscape and wear a beret.
No, extraordinary. So how do you evaluate then, Greg, Trump's diplomatic maneuvering, balancing global appearance with his America First rhetoric? And what does it reveal about his foreign policy priorities?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. He's all about outcomes. He's all about peace through strength and deterrence. He is not about proper diplomacy. He's not a diplomat. He doesn't care if he's hurting feelings in the salons of Europe, in Brussels or Berlin. You saw him dress down the Germans in 2018. Everyone was shocked. Western media went crazy. Mean old Mr. Trump. And it's going to ruin, the relationship. Well, look what happened. 3 years later, Russia invades Ukraine. The Germans are buying coal from anybody who would sell it to them. Last year, the Europeans bought $22 billion worth of oil, gas, and coal from Russia in spite of all the brain damage. And so, President Trump is right. Ultimately, he might be provocative and freak people out at the beginning, but it turned out he was right completely about the Germans in 2018. They're finally at least hinting at spending more on defense. They're finally hinting at maybe building some nuclear power, or maybe building some LNG facilities to buy liquid natural gas from the Americans. And so, they're making the right moves, but he's not diplomatic. He's talking about outcomes. So what he's doing on the world stage right now is looking at the outcomes, ending the war, of course, that's important to him. He wants peace in the Middle East. He got it in first term, and it blew up in the Biden term. But, he can get that back. I think he will. And look, you've already seen commitments from the Arab neighbors to rebuilding Gaza. You've seen the Israelis just go on a tear the last 12 months with really successful campaigns against Iran, against the Houthis, against Hezbollah, and even against Hamas. Like it or not, it's unpleasant to watch. But, Hamas has to be eliminated, and Trump is all for that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've often said that Trump really wants the Nobel Peace Prize. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, he'll never get it because, the globalist institutions of the world and the multilaterals really don't like President Trump. It's a shame because people, even if you didn't miss President Trump, you missed the peace and prosperity of 2019 and 20. And so, I thought one of his great accomplishments was the Abraham Accords. Obviously, the October 7th was not good news for the Abraham Accords in terms of getting the Saudis into the Accords, but you notice the existing Abraham Accords withstood that drama, and they're still in place and they're still working. I think the Saudis will come in. I don't think it's a 5-year deal. I think it's maybe within the next year, and I do think that you'll see an expansion generally of peace and prosperity in the Middle East. I think he handled Iran quite well in the first term. Biden unwound everything. In Biden's first 2 years in the White House, staffers were not allowed to utter the words Abraham Accords. They couldn't put it in a memo, in an email. It was forbidden language because Biden didn't want to give President Trump credit for a peace agreement. So I don't look at the Nobel Committee changing their minds anytime soon.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I know it would mean a lot, or I suspect it would mean a lot to Donald Trump. And if he does secure peace, then absolutely he would be a very good candidate. But his aggressive push for the Ukraine-Russia ceasefire, paired with Marco Rubio's warnings about abandoning talks, obviously have created uncertainty. From a market's perspective, as you know, markets don't like uncertainty. How is this geopolitical gamble impacting investor sentiment? And how can Trump's deal-making style deliver a resolution?
Yeah, it's classic President Trump. Say something provocative, everybody freaks out, and then 3 days later or 3 months later, everything works out, and it turns out he was right. So on the trade, that will work itself out. We're going to see a deal likely from India in the very near term. I think you'll see 17 deals come through in the near and medium term. The geopolitical stuff with Ukraine, that's a little more difficult because the real wild card, obviously, is Putin. He has 4,500 nuclear warheads. I think there will have to be a reset somehow geopolitically or diplomatically with the Russians, whether we like it or not. It's something that, in spite of their anemic economy and their rather underachieving conventional military, they have nuclear weapons. And that's something that, is always going to make Russia play above their weight in terms of their influence. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish it wasn't so, but I do think you'll see a reset there. But right now, the wild card is Putin. So I don't think that the Ukraine-Russia really affects the markets that much. I think it's much more the trade uncertainty. And even if you go back to February of 2022, oil prices went up. Wheat and fertilizer prices went up. Yes, all true. The dependency on Ukraine and Russia for wheat, on Russia for energy, that shook the markets, but it settled right back down within 6 months. The real asset inflation and the real inflationary pressure on energy globally was Joe Biden putting his foot on the neck of the U.S. energy industry. That's fixable, and it's being fixed right now. But I don't agree whenever I hear these critics say, Putin caused the inflation in natural gas or oil. Not the case. Temporary blip for sure, but came right back down to the Biden levels, which were 60% higher than Trump levels.
Right. Okay. Let's look at Israel and Gaza then. Israel's supply cut off to Gaza. Obviously, it's intensified a humanitarian crisis with Trump's pro-Israel stance drawing scrutiny. How does Trump Middle East policy in these 100 days affect the U.S. economic and diplomatic credibility in the region, especially as markets monitor energy and trade risks?
Yeah, I think his policies are beneficial to the region in general. I mean, surely the economic outcomes of the Abraham Accords were quite positive. The Israelis should be a a poster child of economic development in a region that suffers from from arid conditions and lack of oil. I mean, look, they've turned Israel into a phenomenal economy without the benefit of massive oil reserves, or maybe they don't have any at all. And they do have some water challenges, and they've solved that. And so, really great tech sector in Israel. I think you're starting to see the UAE and Saudi try to emulate some of the things that are going on in Israel. I think getting rid of Hamas will ultimately be great news for the Palestinian people and for the region. So, I mean, this is ugly. It's messy. Notice it didn't happen under Trump 1.0. Happened under Biden, as did the Russia-Ukraine invasion. And it just goes to show you the value of deterrence and peace through strength. There's two or three carrier groups in and around the Mediterranean right now. That's a display of strength that will prevent war. He did it to Iran in the first term. He did it to Russia in the first term. He was very hostile to Putin in the first term. But unfortunately, it's too late for deterrence right now, because Putin quite deliberately invaded during Democrat administrations, and as well as George W. Bush in 08. So 08, 14, and 22, but nothing under Trump. And I think you can expect that to happen again.
Yeah. Let's look at Trump's deportation agenda then, because obviously that sparked debate as he marks his 100 days. As a conservative advocate yourself, how do you weigh the economic and political impact of these hardline immigration moves, especially amid that global backlash?
Yeah, the global backlash is really funny. The Europeans virtue signal from their salons in Brussels and Berlin, and yet the voters love it, right? The European voters want to end. The number one issue for voters in Europe is mass migration. The number two issue is cost of living. What the president is doing is leading the charge for the world of how governments should handle their countries. And that's polling right now plus 15 in a 50-50 country. The United States, is basically a 50-50 country. Nothing polls at plus 15. Well, some things do, but I'll get to those. But right now, 55% of Americans fully support mass deportation. Only 40% oppose. The deportation of criminals polls at 2/3, at 66%, including people that voted for Kamala. Almost 2/3 of Kamala voters are supporting the deportation of criminals, and Hispanics, which, most of the deportations, like it or not, are people of Hispanic descent, El Salvador, Venezuela, it's polling at 68, right? The Hispanics love it as much as anybody. And so, this is really important, and it's taking a leadership role. Economically, of course, it's great because it's massive burden on British and American taxpayers, the illegal migrants, the migrant hotels, all the free stuff. The cities like the one I'm sitting in Chicago are being decimated by illegal migration. And I see it visibly both in New York and here in Chicago. So, this is something, again, it's sad when those top two issues for voters are ignored by leadership, and all they want to talk about is censoring misinformation, which I call censorship, and climate change. The existential crisis of climate change. It's completely tone deaf, and good for President Trump for listening to the voters.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's a worldwide issue about immigration here in the UK. They're turning up the rhetoric now. You're seeing that Starmer is trying to emulate what Reform are doing, and Nigel Farage to try and basically win back some votes. Now, Trump himself, he's likened his first 100 days to FDR, citing rapid executive actions like tax cuts, deregulation, and now car tariffs. Drawing on your economic and political expertise, Greg, how sustainable is Trump's legacy compared to historical benchmarks? And can it withstand the market volatility we've seen in the last 100 days?
Oh, yes and yes. I mean, he'll definitely withstand the market volatility. That's going away. I was watching the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent this morning. And he's done a good job of sort of calming the markets. When he speaks, markets rally. When he's not speaking, markets trade down. But I do think that this will all work out. This volatility will go away as soon as these trade deals are announced. And then let's remember, too, the other legs of the stool, the other parts of his economic platform are tax reform, reducing taxes, and massive deregulation. The deregulation has already started. And that's what he did in his first term, not quite as dramatically as he's doing it now. But I think we need more of that because we have $11 trillion in freshly printed debt from Joe Biden. We've got interest rates at double what they were at the end of Trump's first term, thanks to Joe Biden again. So he's got some headwinds. You know, we here in America have some headwinds right now, basically because of the Biden legacy. And so he's got to really get his arms around this. I think that others in the world will take a page out of the US playbook. It's not going to come from these center right and center left governments who are very much for the big state and continuing the welfare state insanity. But I do think the parties of the right will ultimately win and emulate what's happening in America.
Yeah, and finally, Greg, as chairman of the Republicans overseas, you've still got that position, haven't you? Even though you're now, even now you're no longer overseas, you're back at base.
I've got my 90 days, big brother.
You got your 90 days. Well, we're going to have a lunch when you come eventually. We're going to make sure one of those 90 days is spent together. Tell me then, in your view, which of Trump's 100-day achievements is tariffs, deportation drives, deregulation, or diplomatic moves like the Pope's funeral resonate most with conservative audiences worldwide, and how do they align with global challenges like Gaza's crisis or Canada's election shift under Mark Carney?
Yeah, look, I think it's really a shame about Mark Carney winning because I think he made this election about Trump. And that was okay. You can pick on Trump for picking fights with Canada and, claiming he was going to, talking about the 51st state. That's all just banter. That's all typical President Trump banter. But Mark Carney did a hell of a job making this election about Trump. It's really a shame. The conservatives were up 20 points only a few months ago, and they lost by a couple. So look, between the border, the economy, energy, defense, the cultural stuff, it's really hard to choose. Boys playing in girls' sports, that's over. The Defense Department has returned to lethality and meritocracy, and that's good. Energy sector, ultimately, drill baby drill is super popular. Economic reforms with tax reform, deregulation, the border. I would say the border, for generally speaking, is the most popular. That's where he polls the best. But I would say in the long term, it's liberating the energy sector and the rest of the private sector that will benefit Americans and the world the most.
Okay. And finally, then, what do you hope to see in the next 100 days?
Same thing. Lots more of it. It'll be hard to continue the pace and the scale because he doesn't have that many more issues to address or policies to execute. He's already done it. But I think execution is important. We've got to get this tax reform bill through Congress. He's going to spend a lot of time on that, I would imagine. But just keep up the great work.
Keep up the great work. Well, you keep up the great work as well. Greg, it's always a delight to have you on the show. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. I appreciate it.